So network monitoring, which we have a whole 1-unit class in here, coming around next semester, I think. So the idea here, you need to monitor your network so you can find out what's happening. And on the network logs, you might find good information about what happened and when it happened, and certainly about the scope, because the logs on any one server or endpoint don't give you much of a clue about the scope. The network is where you go to find out how many devices, how many of my locations are involved in the breach. And so there's 4 types of network monitoring. The most common is event-based alerts, which comes from an intrusion detection system of some sort that is looking for known bad events. And that's, of course, very popular like antivirus because it's easy to use and easy to understand. Then you can do whole packet captures, which are too much data, hard to understand, and something you don't want to look at unless you have to. And then you got session information, which keeps track of headers in packets and therefore how many packets or bytes are going each way. And then high-level statistics. These are the 4 types. So the event-based alerts are what you get from IDSs like Snort and Suricata, and therefore it has to have a rule set, which is known bad patterns of activity, and it will trigger when those known bad patterns of activity come by and pop up like an antivirus saying, scan detected, DOS attack detected, or whatever it detects. Then you can look at either headers or full packets. And you can configure a tool like tcpdump to record only the first 64 bytes of each packet, which does not give you all the data, but it gives you all the addressing information, so you know who's talking to who at what time. And that gives you a start. Or you can get the whole packet and save it, in which case you can reproduce everything that happened on the network later, except for encryption, which is much more stiff than it used to be and greatly lowering the value of full packet capture, which has really become significant since they wrote your book, only in the last few years because of Snowden. Snowden's leak exposed the secret. I mean, a lot of people like me had said, you know, you really ought to be encrypting your local area network traffic, but nobody bothered until Snowden leaked out the PowerPoint files that showed that the NSA was treating American companies as adversaries, and they were sneaking unauthorized devices onto their LAN to sniff that unencrypted packet inside Yahoo and other companies. That motivated people to encrypt their internal traffic, and it also motivated people to move to TLS 1.2 and 1.3, which have forward secrecy, so that even if you archive the encrypted data and get the key later, it still doesn't do you any good because it uses a different key for each session. And that means modern HTTPS data is hardly worth recording because you're not going to be able to decrypt it later. Yeah.
NSA was putting hardware appliances in the LANs?
Either hardware or software. I'm not quite sure which. I think the PowerPoints made it, wasn't completely sure. But anyway, they were certainly picking it up. And the fact that you trusted this trusted internal network where you didn't bother to encrypt things was a dumb idea, which all the security experts have been saying forever. You shouldn't be trusting the internal network because even if the NSA isn't hacking, you've got your employees bringing in laptops and iPhones and everything full of God knows what malware and connecting them to your network. And so why do you think you can trust that? Anyway, so that's the game. Recording the packets is good, and you will now have enough information to see who was talking to who when. And once you decide your indicators are compromised, like an IP address of a command and control server, you can then look at this to see who's been sending data to that command and control server. You have to be careful, of course. That's what went wrong at this college when we had the crazy CTO hired his crooked contractor. He came here and he claimed that he found all these viruses because he found traffic going to supposedly bad sites with this kind of analysis. So you can certainly do it wrong and get false positives and think you have a bunch of malware that isn't there, which is what happened to us. And that's the problem. You have to have a human judge these things. Some simple rule, like you sent traffic to a server that is known to have bad things on it, is not enough to prove you're infected. That could just mean you got an email from that site and it did a reverse DNS lookup to see if you should accept the email. Not that you're infected, but that will cause some packets to go back to it. And that's what I think happened to us, because one of the surprising findings of this contractor was that we had 200 Windows viruses on our Unix DNS servers. That seems like it's probably a false positive coming from DNS reverse lookups. So then you got high-level statistics, just showing how many total bytes went here and how many total bytes went there. This is what they call pen registers for telephone calls. So the most common thing, of course, is known events, rules or thresholds. This will be recognized bad packets or traffic that exceeds an approved level, like too many login attempts per second from the same IP. And this will just pop up alerts like Snort and Suricata. so it's got signatures. Some rules are cheap, which means they don't take too much processor time at the sensor. It is very easy to get too fancy and write a complicated rule that will slow down your sensor and cause it to lose data. So your complex indicators are dangerous with things like string matching or session reconstruction. So here's a rule, a Snort rule that detects SSH brute force attacks. Here's the message will be brute force login attempt, and it does count of 5 in 60 seconds. So if somebody tries to log in 5 times in 60 seconds from the same IP, it will trigger them as an apparent SSH brute force attack. You will see these. It's very easy to find them. I could make a project out of it. If you guys have cloud servers, it would actually be pretty fun. All you have to do is sniff your cloud server. If you put a server anywhere on the internet and you open port 22, you immediately get these. There are people trying to break into the whole internet. You can just harvest the passwords. Every second or two, these guys will try to log in. I've set up the server. I've done it before. It's pretty fun to do. You just set up a SSH server that logs the passwords, which is of course not something they normally do, but it's easy enough to write something that will do that. And when you do, you'll see the password list they use, and it is very strange. It's not what I would think of as the top 100 passwords. It's bizarre nonsense. But anyway, there's just various criminals that have written these things, and apparently this works. Apparently if you scan the whole internet on port 22, you get in servers, because I think they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work. Anyway, then you can put this will give you fast alerts. This is one thing that will put text in a file, one place to put your outputs. You could put the alerts in a special file so they don't go in the normal file. Here's an alert for a fake SSL certificate. Back in 2013, it was fairly new, I think, for people to have a fake HTTPS certificate, and managing it is, of course, all about the advanced persistent threats. And so they found this and published it in 2003. This was a fake AOL SSL certificate, so they had a way to identify it by serial number and so on, and they published this rule for everybody to put in Snort. I think I mentioned before when I went to Baythread a few years ago, there was a secret talk where you couldn't record anything from Akamai, where they told us these Snort rules that would protect the banks from the Al-Qassam cyber army that was attacking American banks at that time. And they had, I think, 15 waves of attack. And the first several waves were incredibly primitive. So you could actually stop them with simple Snort rules. The early ones would just send HTTP requests with like 50 A's in a row in it. So all you had to do was look for anything with 20 A's and block it. And that's one of those cheap rules. That was pretty simple, and he said that's why we don't want them to hear about it, because we're hoping they don't smarten up too fast. Each wave was smarter, and they kept it up until they had done enough damage to punish us for the insult to Muhammad, which they turned into a mathematical formula for a certain amount of dollar damage. And as far as I know, nobody was ever caught or punished for that. They just inflicted enough damage to where they felt like enough damage had been done, and then stopped. Maybe YouTube took down the video, I don't know. Anyway, so header and full packet logging, you can do this so you can analyze data, look for more indicators of compromise, or you can be collecting evidence for further investigation by higher bodies, like even in court. And so if you're going to go to court, then you're going to have to treat this stuff as evidence, create a chain of custody, record a hash and all that, whereas you may not have to do that if you're just doing an internal investigation to patch the hole and keep going, which is normally what people want.
So
Yeah.
Sam, this last one,
Yeah.
full packet logging.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I know we've been reading in this book. You can't really do too much of that.
It's very expensive. In the other class they talk about this. I think if you have 100 megabits per second average traffic, it's like 80 terabytes a month. It's a huge amount of data to store, and then a huge amount to dig through. So a lot of people say you should do it, but in practice very few people do it.
So
Yeah.
again, when would you do it?
Well, you would do it either because you're really serious about your security and you are willing to pay the cost of storing that huge amount of data, or in some targeted way. Like after you suspect there's something going on, you have some limited area where you capture some limited range of traffic because I think they're coming in here and we'll get some of it. That kind of thing.
Could
Yeah.
your average home network work with a few computers and your TV running a wireless and phones and everything? Would that be too much data to capture constantly and sort through? Just for fun?
I think it probably is. You can try it, but I think you'll find it adds up to a lot. I tried doing it on my server, and I stored full packets for a while before I used HTTPS, hoping to catch the people that were attacking me, and it was just too big and horrible. I set it in a ring so it wouldn't fill up my whole hard drive. I made it put 1 gigabyte in each of 10 files and go in a ring, and still it just was too much junk to hunt through. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in Project 5, you're talking about capturing some data, and then you said make sure. You said something about one investigator actually submitted his own capture.
Oh, that's easy. That's the registry.
How do you do that?
Well, that wasn't network traffic, that was the registry. If you use a registry capture utility,
Right.
by default it captures the registry of your current machine you're running. And there was a guy that went to court with that evidence, and that evidence was from his investigating machine. He claimed a bad guy was watching porn in class as a teacher, and it was the investigator watching porn on his analysis machine. And that was the end of him in court. He said, look, in the first place, the other examiner who I knew is, look, in the first place, you captured it from the wrong machine. In the second place, why is your analysis machine even connected to the internet? And why are you watching porn on your analysis machine? What kind of idiot are you? And after that, you lose. I mean, your investigator's credibility has fallen. Unless one could imagine he could come up with a good explanation, but no obvious good explanation is available. At this point, you've obviously got the wrong forensic examiner, and you pretty much just have to give up and settle and hire a different examiner next time. Once you're an idiot, in court it matters. Doesn't seem to matter that much in the Senate, but it matters in court. Yeah.
Can you sort of like wait in the area of a password,
Can you what?
the password area, and waiting for the attacker to attack that?
Oh yeah, you could if you could identify. Yes, you could do a targeted collection of only certain types of traffic, like to a certain form or certain IP address. You could do that, and that would be a good idea. Anyway, so your IDS section can also record the full session if they want to, but most people use tcpdump for careful collection. You wouldn't generally use Wireshark for direct collection. It's a graphical tool. Use tcpdump, but tcpdump has Berkeley standard filters, so you can specify all kinds of rules for the collection of data. Only the data on a certain port, going to a certain IP address, and so on, so you don't save any of the other data and you get just what you want. So that's good old tcpdump. When you run tcpdump, you can have it limit the capture to 64 bytes, or you can get the whole thing, and you can print them out on the screen or not. You can save them or not. You can filter them. You can even configure a bunch of these, and that's what I did when doing the forensic contest at DEF CON. I set 4 or 5 of these going to different files. TCP here, UDP here, port 80 there, so I get smaller files that were pre-sorted. Yeah.
You have an IP address. What data can you get out of that? I mean,
Well, if you have nothing but an IP address, then in itself, that's all it tells you. But once you have an IP address, then you can go back and look at other data like logs and see who's been sending and receiving traffic to that IP address.
there's the IP address for a computer.
Right, if you have the IP address for one computer, that's not necessarily useful, but what you do is you start with some kind of evidence of what the problem is, like the antivirus alert goes off. Then you get the IP address of that computer and see where it's been sending data. And maybe you can find the command and control center's IP address. And then the other infected machines will maybe send it to the same
You
server.
can't change the IP address for a computer, can you?
Yes, you can. For example, in DHCP, it changes all the time. You certainly could change it. And that is, some people actually do that to escape DOS attacks. Some DOS attacks are so primitive, they actually attack an IP address, and moving your server to a different IP address will save you. Another thing you could do, which H.D. Moore did, is when in experiencing DOS attack, he changed his DNS resolution to point back to the attackers they were attacking themselves. And that seems to me like that is almost certainly illegal, but he did it and it worked. And now Cloudflare also considered doing it, but they didn't actually do it. But that's hacking back, and hacking back gets a lot of people excited, but it seems irretrievably illegal. But people have done it and in fact gotten away with it, yeah.
So IP address is sort of like a fingerprint?
No, not at all. That IP address is an indicator of which machine, but it's not any accurate indicator. The MAC address is a little bit more like a fingerprint, but both of them can be altered in software. So neither of them really prove who you're talking to. Yeah.
Why would it be illegal to do what you said?
Well, if someone's attacking me and I bounce the attack back to them, now I'm attacking somebody. It's illegal. Just like if somebody robs me, I'm not allowed to pull out a gun and shoot them. It's I'm committing the crime too.
Okay.
I mean, the cops might be able to do it and the military can do it, but I can't just decide I'm going on the warpath and start doing crimes against people. Yeah.
You wouldn't even be able to get the MAC address, would you, in that scenario?
Not normally. There are ways to get it. You don't get it from the network traffic. You get it by doing a WMI query or by putting malware on the machine that sends the data back. Good. All right. Then there's statistical analysis. NetFlow is the main one here. And the purpose of NetFlow is to catch up. See, this all started with the phone network. And the first thing with the phone network was a AAA server, and the point of that was to make your bill. They had to know who made calls and how long they were so they could put it on your bill and bill you for them. So that was the idea, that you should keep track of what everybody's doing. And NetFlow is for ISPs. So if you pay Comcast for 10 megabits per second, they want to limit you to 10 megabits per second, and they use NetFlow to do that. This is why it was pretty entertaining. I was at the IPv6 Implementers Conference about 5 years ago, and everybody was madder than hell because Cisco had not updated their NetFlow to IP version 6. So every ISP that wanted to deliver IP version 6 had to accept that they were handing out unlimited, unmonitored bandwidth. And the firewalls weren't up there either. And all the BitTorrent people figured this out really fast and started downloading all this illegal stuff over IP version 6. And the ISP guys were pretty irritated at Cisco for not updating their stuff. There was nothing they could buy that they could put on their network to control this. And it was pretty humiliating, but eventually people got on board and updated their junk. But that's the point. NetFlow gives you measure how many bytes went by what protocol to what address. You don't have to record the bytes, but you know the total amount of it, and then you can see what people have been doing, and you could, in principle, limit it. But for our point of view here, we're just interested in analyzing it. We're assuming you're at a company where you're not limiting the bandwidth so much as trying to figure out what happened. And so you'll notice here, if some large amount of data is going somewhere it shouldn't, I don't know exactly what Google did. I don't know if they ever told us, but I think in 2010, this is the kind of data Google used. They said the reason Google caught China hacking them is they saw large amounts of data flowing out to China. And they said, who is sending all this data to China? What is this data? This is our proprietary PDFs and Word documents. Why is this stuff going to China? That was what started it all. And that led them to the massive amount of hacking that China had done to them. Yeah.
Well, 5 slides ago, you said get the header information, IP addresses for legal standing, but it's so easy to spoof IP.
It is. But there is a special exception in the law for automatically generated computer data, like security cameras. You are allowed to testify, not that that data is impossible to fake, but that it is accurate. And then you have an expert give an opinion that that data was not faked in this case. A similar case is forensic examiners. Well, the defense attorney will often say, couldn't a virus have put that porn on their machine? And you can't say that's impossible, because it's certainly possible. What you say is, in my experience, there's no virus like that. That's not what did it. It was this other thing. And that has the same weight as someone saying that blood spatter really came from a dead body, not from something else. It's, if the examiner's credible, then they can sway the jury. So I should say the real evidence is the person, not the stuff.
I was talking about header and full packet logging.
Yeah.
You premise everything on that, and what if it's a fake IP address?
Absolutely, and that's true of all server logs. That's true of pretty much everything. That's why a lot of people, when computer data first came out, a lot of people thought it would never hold up in court because it could all be faked. You could just go in a notepad and change it, but that's really no different than anything else. Like fingerprints can be rubbed off and replaced with a fake fingerprint. For a while, people freaked out, and they said, well, it's just like it always. You have to have a competent examiner that said, well, I looked at it, and I made an expert opinion that this was not fake, that was the real log data. It's an issue. And then you'd explain why. You'd say, we have an automated system, it's sending the data off the network and putting signatures on it or something so that it's hard for the bad guy to erase. That would make you more credible if you have something like that and you can explain it clearly. Okay, then you've got visualization products out there that will let you see graphs. This is what you see Homer Simpson looking at, this graph on the wall of all the things going in and out. And there's Flow Tools and Argus are more tools that will do this. Argus is a tool in Security Onion that does this. And you can eventually get graphs like this showing you have this much traffic normally, but on this occasion you have that much traffic, so something happened. And therefore that's a DOS attack or a bad guy stealing a lot of data or something. And there you go. Here's a log scale is another way to do it, so you can more easily see that this is the normal and that is 10 times above normal. So, all right. Well, I got some cahoots. If you want to reconstruct files from FTP, what do you need to capture? Okay, for that you need the full package, of course. All right. What does NetFlow do? All right, that's high-level statistics. All right. What does Snort do? All right, that's event-based, like antivirus. All right, and what does tcpdump do? Well, you can do it for full packets. You could also do headers. This isn't a brilliant question. This is why these things are extra credit. That's kind of unfair, but such is life. So anyway, let's go back to here and carry on. All right, so if you want to set up your network monitoring system, you've got to get a copy of the packets somewhere. Now, the simplest thing is just get a hardware tap. In the old days, people would just use a hub for this. Hubs are not really fast enough for most modern networks. Instead, you get a tap, which is just designed for this. So you feed in your live network, and it has monitor ports here that give you a copy of every data that goes through the other port. And these things can be as fast as you want to make them. Then you get a copy of everything. If you get an enterprise class switch, it has the ability to make a span port, which does the same thing through software, although it probably can't go up to the fastest speed. Anyway, then you feed that captured data into whatever you're doing with it, which is probably an IDS, maybe full packet logging, whatever you're doing. Your IDS, however, has a problem. This data is screaming through at some high rate, like 10 gigabits per second or something. You don't really have much time to process it. So the IDS cannot be running complicated analysis. So you can't be doing intrusion detection and recording the data at the same time on the same device, not at line speed. So you have to choose one or the other. If you're capturing full content, then you don't have much CPU left to monitor it. So typically you'd have two separate devices doing that.
Sam,
Yeah.
is this bottleneck mainly a bottleneck of processor speed and networking throughput?
Yeah, I think it is processor
It is
speed.
a bottleneck that could be completely eliminated.
Oh, absolutely.
by-
Oh, absolutely. It's not anything absolute. It's just a question. So you could totally avoid this bottleneck by just paying for 2 or 3 devices and spreading it off. And that's what you do in a network monitoring class. You pay for several servers. Yeah, if you would pay for 2 servers and 2 taps, you make extra copies, no limit. It's just a question of money. All right, so you got to define your goals, make sure that you're allowed to monitor whatever you're monitoring, then get the hardware and software, secure your monitoring platform, because of course it is going to be a target of attack. If the bad guys can turn off your monitor, they will do that. And then put it correctly on the network, which is a whole lot harder than you might imagine. It's a big topic in the CNIT 50 class. There's usually not any one place all the traffic goes through, really. There's a place where it goes to the internet, then there's a place where it goes to your domain controller on the LAN and your file server on the LAN, and actually you probably need at least 5 or 6 collection points if you actually want to get all the data. And what's even more horrible is you have address changes all over the place. You have internal address ranges that are translated, so you might get 3 or 4 copies of the same data with different addresses and have a hard time correlating, and it can be a mess. And for even more good, clean fun, this was at DEF CON about 2 years ago in the Packet Hacking Village. I saw a talk of multipath TCP. This is the new hotness. Now, in order to keep availability, you don't just have one ISP. You get Comcast and you get AT&T. So if Comcast is down, you have AT&T. And then you could have them in failover mode where one is just sitting there unused, but that's a waste of money. So you run them both. And now what you do is you run multipath TCP. So one data stream, some of the packets go out one way and some of the packets go out the other way, and they're reconstructed at the other end. You can configure your network to do that, and it's faster. But your poor network monitoring team is now pretty much hosed because they only get half the packets from the stream. It's real hard to reconstruct anything, but that's what people do. Anyway, so when you're done, you're going to have to, of course, test your scheme and make sure you are capturing whatever you need to capture to get what you want, because it's very likely that your first few attempts you will not really be getting the right data. Yeah?
Is there a way to record the surveillance?
To do what?
Record, so you know.
To record it? Record it. Well, it is recording something all along.
Yeah, but you want to know when somebody's attacking you like that. See what they're doing.
Well, that's true, but I mean, but there's generally no way to detect surveillance. That's the idea. I'm not quite sure if you're asking this, but one interesting question is whether you can detect the surveillance in progress. And that is actually worth mentioning. The correct way to do this is to use a hardware device to make an extra copy of the packets, and then to connect a device here that is only connected at layer 2, just by a MAC address with no IP address at all. And now there is no way to detect it. If they scan, they won't find anything. If they manage to put malware on it and control it, it can't phone home because it doesn't have any IP address. You could also make something that just sniffs and doesn't send anything out. It just collects without ever sending any packets out at all. And if you do just take an ordinary laptop and put it here in normal mode, it could in principle be detected by scan and controlled. So if you correctly configure your network monitoring, it'll be completely undetectable to everybody. And that would be the best way to do it.
What's that called, that technique?
I don't know if a name for it, but it's recommended in the network monitoring book, and certainly a wise idea. Anyway, so you're going to need some big hardware that can do all this. You're going to need a processor big enough to handle all this stuff, so you get a server. It turns out Linux is now the fastest at this. It used to be OpenBSD, and if you look at products out there like Juniper routers and pfSense firewalls and Indian software firewalls, they're all based on BSD Unix because that was considered the best for a long time, but now apparently Linux has improved their kernel handling of packets and they are now considered the fastest. They say don't use the default network socket, use NTOPS. PF ring is what you should do. Apparently, I'm not quite sure how you do that, but apparently replacing a kernel module is what you have to do to get the most performance out of Linux. Anyway, so if you are planning ahead, which in practice usually means you already got hacked. Usually nobody is willing to spend any money on anything until after they get hacked the first time. And then they become motivated to spend money to try to stop the future hacks. So that's why, when I used to do white hatting and warn companies, all the experts said, don't warn them. Just let them get hacked. That's the best answer. Then they'll learn. They won't listen to the warning. Just let them get hacked. It's good for them. This is, this is the hard-nosed attitude which I was not anxious to embrace, but it does seem to be realistic. So anyway, you can buy devices to just plug in your network that will do all this for you, of course. And you can go to the other way and use free software with Security Onion, which I tried. There's a textbook just in Security Onion, and I tried teaching a class on it, and Security Onion is so miserable. I gave up halfway through. It is appalling. The tools are out of date. It totally crashes all the time. It's only there to make students suffer. The only purpose, as far as I can tell, of Security Onion is to make you realize that it's worth paying for Snort. This is usually what happens in the open source world. I mean, there's the geniuses that wrote it can make it work. Nobody else can make it work. The rest of us pay a pile of money to get a commercial product that does the same thing, except it works. This is what most computer products have learned. People will pay for a Mac rather than, you could do all that in Linux. I say, well, in principle you could. In practice, I'd like to actually have something that works today. Anyway, so you got to deploy your sensor. You got to find out where the data is coming in and out. Worry about your routes and your choke points. And how do you encapsulate your traffic? I mean, it's a huge problem. Your traffic is probably not only going through network address translation, it's probably being encapsulated by things like GRE and VLANs and perhaps VPNs and so on. If you really look at what's happening on your network, it's probably complicated and confusing and not simple to reconstruct what actually happened from the network traffic, especially these days when more and more people are just putting encryption everywhere. You may be able to change your network in ways that help, like make everything go through some central point, but in practice, networks seem to sprawl out. This, I think, is related to a lot of other forms of sprawl, like VM sprawl and data sprawl. When you decide to become a secure organization, step one is an asset inventory. What is valuable and where is it? This is much harder than you might think. How many copies are there of that all-important file? Is it in everybody's Dropbox, on their phone, in their Gmail, at their house? Are your employees running their own email server like Hiller? I mean, people got mad at her, and one point is, this is a terrible idea for your network administrator. I'd like to know where the stuff is. Like, we need to know where the email is. And if it's not even in company servers, that's really pretty outrageous from the viewpoint of being able to keep care of it. Of course, you have to physically secure the network monitoring devices, or they're subject to plain old physical attack. And you have to patch the OS and document everything. It's a good idea to put Tripwire on your network monitoring devices. Tripwire is a tool that just records a hash of every system file, and it lets you know if any of them change. So if you are putting on an update or new software, then system files change, and that's fine. But if it changes when you were not deliberately putting on new software, that's a bad guy putting malware on your box. And you can use Tripwire to give you a high degree of confidence that that has not happened. And that's what you'll want to have if you're going to take that data to court. You want to say, we know that nobody hacked this monitoring device and its data is intact. You monitor to see if it's getting the right stuff, if your hardware is fast enough, if your signatures are fast enough and precise enough to find what you want. And then you can look at performance metrics to see if it's dropping packets. All network monitoring devices drop packets if too much data is going by, more than they can process. And then you have to analyze the data you captured. So Wireshark is mainly what it's for. Wireshark is not really for live captures. It's intended to analyze PCAPs. That's what it's mainly for. It's actually not very safe to collect live packets because the analysis engines are written by an army of amateurs, and they are not particularly vetted for security. So it is really not considered a good idea to run Wireshark or to live collect data, but more to analyze things later. And you learn, use a targeted query to zero in on the interesting data. So here's a scenario from the book. So 2 days ago, an attacker accessed this system, and they were running monitoring logs, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter and a chapter after this, where we have application metering on your network. This is what all the enterprises do. They pay for something like LANDesk, which records every time somebody launches an application. This guy launched FTP, this guy launched RAR, this guy launched this, and then you can look through that log and see this kind of thing, that somebody ran RAR and FTP on that server, and that is not normal. There is no business case for that software, and they don't normally run it, so that is a suspicious thing. So now we have complete packet capture data, and we can tell what time this happened, and we know that RAR and FTP are not normal things, so we can get that PCAP, and I've got it loaded up here. Let me, it's in your book, and I've got it in my Wireshark. Okay. Wireshark is great, runs on every platform. So here's that PCAP. Okay, so the lamest way to use Wireshark is to scroll through packets one by one up here. Don't waste your time on that. That's for real amateurs. I used to do that when I was brand new to Wireshark. What you do is go statistics, conversations. Now this is a whole lot better. Now I can see I have two conversations, one on port 20 and one on port 21. This is FTP. And 1,700 bytes this way, 1,900 bytes that way, so I can follow these conversations. Now normally, with a properly working version of Wireshark, I can click on this and then follow the stream, but this version has a bug in it, which is irritating. This is very, very common. Wireshark is just like every other tool we use. They keep bringing out new versions, and they add new features and break the old ones, and that's the way everything is. So since that doesn't work, I'll just do it this way. Right-click, follow the stream here, that'll do it. There's a TCP packet. I can follow the TCP stream here. And so here's the first bit of data. This is the control channel. So here's the person logging in as Frank, then turning on some kind of transferring some file, eddytransfer.bin. And then if I go to the second stream, which is here, the second stream is raw binary data, and it starts with RAR. This is a RAR zipped file. Now, you can actually save it as binary and then unzip it with unrar. And as the book points out, you're not going to be able to unzip it because this is encrypted. This is password protected, and you don't have the password. But you do not need to...
Frank.
What's that?
The last page is that Frank was...
Yes, that's the thing. See, this is also true of WinZip. Even if you encrypt an archive, it does not protect the names of the files. The names of the files are visible. You can open it to see the names of the files, even though it's encrypted. You just can't get the contents because they're just right here, and you can just see them. Here's the one that matters to us, pwdump, a password hacking tool, is in there. And so their fgdump.log, so they ran this tool, and it stole the password hashes and put it in this file, and that's what was being FTP'd here. The bad guy got malware on the system, ran it, RAR'd it up, and sent it off with FTP to steal the data. And you can see that even though they put a password on it, we don't have the password, you can see what they stole. And of course, we don't need to see that because we have the real passwords. We don't need the password. We just need to know what the bad guy got. Now we know the bad guy has the password hashes off that box. And so we can look and see what password hashes are on that box and know which accounts are probably compromised by that event. So that's, anyway, that's a little bit of what you can do with Wireshark. And you see, you don't look at packets one by one. You go to one of these high-level views, like statistics conversations, where you can quickly find the general story and save yourself hunting packet by packet through things. And here's what it looks like if you take one of those files and open it from the second PCAP file. This is more data they're stealing, I think, Or this might be what they downloaded to build the hacking tools, so I'm not really sure. Anyway, so that's the game here. You could, of course, crack into those RAR files too, but we probably don't need to. We don't really need the details of that. Now, sometimes when you're looking at network packets, you would like to know whether you're dealing with an automated process or a human. And one simple way to do it is look for typographical errors that a human makes. And another thing is just look at the timing. Here is someone doing an FTP exchange. So it says, give me your username. And then it takes them a whole second or two to type it. Please specify the password. So request user Frank, 2.5 seconds, then 2.7, then 3.9. If this was an automated process, it would be much faster. So that suggests there's a human typing in these letters, taking a few seconds to type them in. All right, and so there's the pwdump hacking tool, and that's one of them. Here's another one. You have a port scan coming out of your devices, Apache server, and of course you check, and nobody on your company was actually supposed to be doing a port scan at that time. It's not common that anybody at your company is doing a port scan. And so there shouldn't have been any user logged in either at that time. And the login history shows that no one was logged in. So that's getting more annoying. Someone is actually using your machine without logging in. Now we do this all the time in 124. You'll be doing it. This is PHP shells. PHP shells are wonderful. You can execute commands without logging in. Nothing goes in the history file. It's very annoying, and it's hard to catch too. It took me a long time to configure my server to do Apache forensic logging to catch them. So you get a large amount of requests, and then you see what's really going on, many requests of this PHP page, which means you have a PHP injection vulnerability, and they are abusing your PHP page to execute commands on the server. So you have post requests going there, then get requests to this, and the guests, so first they do post requests here to upload a shell, then they put a shell up with temp bkxcn, then they have commands to the PHP shell containing commands. Now the data here is encrypted, and I didn't bother to do this live or make it homework for you because I think this is out of date. I used to do this a few years ago. In my opinion, this is almost impossible now because everybody's using TLS 1.2 and 1.3. It used to be possible to get a key off your server and decrypt the SSL traffic later. It's not really possible anymore. But anyway, you can get it. Wireshark has the ability to get the master key out of it. You can feed in the master key that you get from the server, this server.key file, and then you can unpack the stuff for the older versions of SSL, I think like TLS 1.1. Anyway, so here you can see what's actually going, and when you do it for this file, you see the stuff going to login.php, and there's the PHP shell being uploaded, and this is now what a PHP shell looks like. You have a filename.php, and then you have a parameter command that is echo something, unzip, net view, task list. Those are command line commands being executed in a PHP shell. And what's awesome about them is you don't log in, they run into the permissions of the web server, they don't get stored anywhere. Unless you configure expensive logging that slows down your server, they're not recorded anywhere. And here they're getting them out of full packets, which they had to decrypt. It's hard to catch this stuff. It is a hacker's very popular trick. It's also, this is how most people get their PHP sites hacked, because almost every PHP site has file upload vulnerabilities. It is very hard to prevent. The whole point of using PHP for something like WordPress is you wanted to let people put up pictures or something, so they have some ability to upload files. Almost always there's some way to abuse that ability, and you end up with a PHP shell. This is why WordPress sites get hacked all the bloody time, and everybody else that uses PHP. It's very convenient to make a beautiful looking site, but you get hacked.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I read last night that 80% of web servers are using PHP.
I didn't know it was that high, but it is very high. I know WordPress is a large portion all by itself. Yeah, PHP is easy. I use it all the time. Of course, my servers is there to be hacked. But PHP is the easiest way to.
Jobs
Yeah,
available.
it's one of the most popular languages. I mean, people use it all the time, but it's very dangerous. In practice, you get hacked a lot. Of course, then you get hire teams to clean it up.
So what do you use instead of it?
It's a hard thing to say. I mean, in practice, you want a content management system. Most people like WordPress. You might choose Joomla or Drupal, but they have their own vulnerabilities. In practice, users have a problem. Probably the best thing you could do is use WordPress, but update it, and carefully don't put in a lot of plugins. The problem with WordPress is not the main engine anymore. It used to be. But the main engine had so many vulnerabilities, they actually patched it. In the last 5 years, there haven't been any critical WordPress vulnerabilities. But the problem is, it's a platform and you can add plugins from everybody, like themes, and if you do that, of course, you get as vulnerable as the quality of that plugin. So if you're conservative and you don't put in very many plugins and you actually check first to see the reputation of the plugin and you keep the plugins updated, you might be all right. But of course, most people don't. That is probably the only thing to do to be reasonably safe, is to just use it conservatively and work hard at updating it.
So there's no alternative.
I don't think there's any reasonable alternative. Not really, because WordPress has such wonderful features. WordPress makes it very easy for all your people that create content to put it up and make it beautiful, even though they're not very technical. They can just write stuff, make it look good, put it up. It is so valuable. People put up with the security flaws. And this, I bet, is the case of all security teams, right? Your boss says, look, I have to use this stuff. I don't care if it's unsafe. Your job is to secure it. Usually, the best thing to get the job done is not the most secure. And you hire security people and say, well, you figure out what to do. You figure out how to scan it or monitor it, filter the traffic. It's your job to help support our use of this dangerous product because it's getting the money to come in. And that's, I think, really the whole game of security. I mean, if people just did almost nothing on the computers, they'd be safe, but there'd be no assets to protect. Yeah.
So when you're building web pages and you're coding for security, you should probably know PHP.
Well, PHP is, yes, if the people you're going to use PHP, you need to know it.
80 to 95%.
That's right. PHP is absolutely one out there. It's like, I think, the number 3 most popular language or something like that. It's a real good skill, and you should know it. It's going to be, you can complain about it all you like, it's going to be in every company. There's a time when people hated Microsoft Office. They say you can hate it all you like, but everybody's using it, so you have to cope with it. That's the way it is. And I think PHP security is getting slightly better. The latest version begins to address SQL injection, finally, after about 20 years. PHP version 7 actually has different methods to communicate with MariaDB, which has replaced MySQL, and it's harder to perform SQL injection on it. But, you know, it's moving very slowly in the direction of more security. Anyway, so here's more of these commands: net user backup, net local group, and so on. Once you do get access to the raw URLs that were resolved by the server, you'll see command line commands in it. There are other products out there like NetWitness Investigator that will sort the data and have things you can click on to see the files that were sent and the images that were sent. And then you can get the logs. Now, we talked here about full packet captures and data that came from sensors on the wire. There are also logs created by your network devices. Your router is making logs, your firewall is making logs, the servers and the endpoints are all making logs. And your DHCP servers are logging that, and you're going to need that to untangle what device had what as the addresses change. You can configure a lot of logging on firewalls, although usually they do very little logging to make them faster. And your IDS sensors may get parts of it, your host-based sensors might, and you might see, if the attacker is actually smart enough to erase the logs, they probably can't get them all. And you might find logs on other domain controllers, where some of the attempts to authenticate went over there, and they weren't erased. Server-based logs are on individual systems. Network-based logs are probably harder for the attacker to get rid of. You can attack network devices, you can compromise them and take them over, but it is a whole other avenue of attack. That's why when the shadow brokers, when the Russian government got the NSA's secrets by stealing it through McAfee antivirus, or through Kaspersky antivirus, they created the fake identity that pretended to be Estonian Guccifer, and they dumped it out, and they chose to dump only the router hacking tools because the purpose was not to actually facilitate all the crime in the world, but to just humiliate the NSA. So they dumped out their Cisco router hacking tools, which were awesome. You can totally hack Cisco routers, and the NSA has tools that will just blast them open, but that's not normally your main target. And it's a whole different job to learn how to hack the Cisco router compared to how to hack the server. That's what most people want to do, is hack servers, because that's where the goodies are. Hacking the routers is an extra activity that only your really serious people like the NSA and the foreign military would do. Anyway, then after you got these logs from all those devices, you got a big problem, which I hope you saw some of when we started playing with Snort. This is the problem. All the devices are logging it in a different format, with a different layout, with different names for the same thing, which is driving me nuts in that contest. I'm looking for something and they have like 5 different names for the IP address, and I'm like, I can't find the IP address. How can it be so hard to find the IP address? And on top of that, what's even worse is they have different times. Some of them are in local time, some are in GM time, some have the wrong timestamp. So, you know, it can be very annoying to aggregate it all, and that's what SIMs do, more or less. Anyway, that's the story. I've got another set of cahoots.
Yeah, how far did you get in that contest for the NSA?
I didn't get very far in that one at all. That one I lost interest. I did like the first 3 or 4 levels of the flare-on, though. That was pretty good. The NSA one was pretty irritating.
Boring?
Well, it was just stuff I didn't care about very much. It was ransomware, but you had to go through these DIL files. And
You already got level 3 last time, didn't you? Or
not the
whatever.
NSA. This
Oh,
was
NSA or something like that, or third position?
level 3 of flare-on I got.
A flare-on.
Yes,
Oh.
yeah. But there were like 3 or 4 CTFs at the same time, and I looked at the NSA for about an hour and I said, this one looks tedious, and I did something else. It was important, though. It was ransomware. But you had to somehow, it was irritating me. The flare-on was very interesting. In fact, I think the flare-on has ended, so I can now give it to you for homework. Anyway, so
And borrow it?
yeah, well, once it's over, it's fair game. Everyone should have blogged solutions up. And the flare-on was nice. The first one was Java, the next one was C++, .NET, good stuff. Appropriate for this class. Not binary analysis, you know, pretty easy if you have the right tool. I, in fact, wasted most of my time trying to apply the techniques from the malware analysis class, which are far too advanced. There was an easy way, and I was in the binary getting lost, and all you had to do was find a C++ source code and modify it, which would have been too easy. I didn't even think of that for a while.
Dang it.
And after it was all over, I finally realized what Al told me. There's a special tool from flare-on that has all the stuff you're supposed to use. I spent hours finding the right product. If I remembered to just use the flare-on product from FireEye, of course the stuff is right there. Well, you know. This is why it's the first time I did it. If I do it again next year, I'll be a lot more ahead, knowing what I should try. Anyway. Which one does IDS or surveillance, but not both? Kind of a misnomer, but your intrusion detection system is either recording everything or analyzing it, not both. All right. Which one lets you write custom decoders in Lua? Whatever the heck Lua is. I haven't tried to learn Lua. Everybody seems to invent a new language for every damn thing.
Sure wasn't that in Hawaii?
Might have been, I know. Everything has its own stupid language. Every blockchain has their own language. I think you're just not cool unless you write your own language for everything. They all look just like JavaScript too. I don't know how if you really need all these stupid languages. But anyway, Wireshark has their own language, Lua. I don't think Wireshark wrote it. Apparently somebody else wrote it, but Wireshark adopted it. All right. So which of these will make sure that your operating system files are intact? Okay, that's Tripwire. I had a request to write projects doing Go. Go is apparently new hotness. People say it's cooler than Python, so I guess I got to look at that. R is something else I'm hoping to avoid a while yet, but you know, Go apparently is worth it, so Golang. I know Ethereum is written in Go. Anyway, so the file format used by hackers to execute commands on the server. Very annoying. Unless you're the attacker, then it's fine. That is those PHP shells. Guy hacked me like for about a week with that, laughing at me as I couldn't find out what he was doing. Anyway, so, all right. That was educational, of course. Okay, so I got CAS, an MDOT, an employee. All right, and I bet these chat messages are telling me who people are. So I have 2 mysteries, 1337 and employee. And I'm just going to clean up and go to the lab. I don't have a new project to show you, but you've got enough to keep you out of trouble for a while.